Hi, this is Dorie Clark. We are here with Newsweek's weekly interview show, Better, and our guest this week is Mr. John Baldoni. We're talking about leading with grace. And John is the author of the new book, Grace Notes, Leading in an Upside-Down World. John, it's so great to have you here.
Well, Dorie, it's a treat. Thank you for bringing me on. And I'm a big fan of all the work that you do. So it's my honor to be on with you. So.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, John. It's great to have you here. And welcome to everyone who is tuning in. We are so pleased to have you. Feel free to type into the chat box and let us know who you are and where you're calling in from. And so, John, the first question that I have for you is, so you wrote this book, Grace Notes. It is about the idea, the concept of leading with grace. What do you mean by that? And why is that something that is so important in your view for today's leaders?
Oh, well, excellent question. Grace Notes is a follow-on book to my book, Grace, a Leader's Guide to a Better Us, which came out a couple of years ago. Last year, when we were going through the pandemic, I started putting down video reflections about what I was feeling, what I thought the leaders were feeling, executives I was working with. So we talked about concepts of fear, dislocation, empathy, resilience was a big theme. And I started looking at the transcripts of these little selfie videos, and I said, if I collected them, they might be a good little book. And it turned out right. And so I call this book Grace Notes, Leading in an Upside-Down World. And truly, we are in an upside-down world. As our colleague C.B. Bowman said, last year, 2020, we didn't have just one crisis. We had the virus. We had economic fragility. We had social injustice came to the fore with, and then we had, climate change accented again with some serious hurricanes and massive fires on the West Coast. And of course, a contentious election. So what a tough year. But we held it together. We have survived, Dorie. And this book is, in a way, we start in a dark place with the closing down. But I want to say we end in a place of lightness because we have survived. And I want to say we've emerged as a better people. And so that's what Grace Notes is about. It's a moment in time, but I hope the lessons are timeless in that you can go through it and say, this is what fear is like. This is how I deal with it. All of these types of things. And it's a book that began in darkness, but it has some positive notes to it.
That's really powerful, John. Thank you for that. And I want to say hi to some of the folks who are tuning in live to join us. We're glad to have Brent from Dayton, Marion from Atlanta, Susan's here from Cape Cod, Cheryl from Minneapolis, St. Paul, Anna from Vancouver, Pam from Seattle, Todd from New York. So many great friends. Janet from Syracuse. We're glad to have you here and more. And if you have a question for John Baldoni, the author of the new book, Grace Notes, please type it into the chat box, and we'd love to hear what is on your mind. Now, John, one thing that comes to mind as we think about the concept of leading with grace, how do we know if we're doing it, or how do we perceive it among other people? What are the hallmarks so that we know that we're doing it the right way?
That's a great thought. And, on my little LinkedIn Live show, Grace Under Pressure, I've interviewed nearly 100 people, and every one of them, I ask a question. Can you tell me a moment of can you tell me a moment of grace that you've experienced? And these moments have been as simple as a transaction. It was a rainy day. I was out of town and someone handed me an umbrella. I mean, and then there have been life-changing moments. A soldier told me about a moment in combat where he didn't expect to survive and did. That was a moment of grace. For a broader standpoint, grace is given to us with no strings attached. It is a catalyst for goodness. It's generosity. It's compassion. It's respect. And from a leader's standpoint, it's acting on our better nature, and it's energizing the organization to move forward. So we need it more than ever. It's a kindness, a connectedness, and that willingness to bring people together and look at our better nature. And gosh, we live in such contentious times that how easy is it to throw stones? Grace is the opposite. So.
Yeah, it's such a useful message these days, especially, John. Thank you. We want to say hi to Veronica, who's here from New Jersey. We have DT from Rochester. We have Gisela from Monterrey, Mexico. We have Eric from the Netherlands, and even more friends. Thank you for tuning in. We're here with John Baldoni, author of Grace Notes, and this is Newsweek's weekly interview show, Better. If you want to make sure you never miss one of our episodes, make sure to follow me at DorieClark.com. You can sign up and get a free self-assessment and get regular reminders about this. And if you want to learn about John and his work, be sure to go to johnbaldoni.com. Now, John, you actually mention in announcing your materials for your book, Grace Notes, that you consider it a call to action. What is it a call to action for? What is the manifesto related to grace as a leader?
Well, I mean, to quote President Lincoln in his second inaugural, act on our better nature, better angels. And what it means is to, I mean, from a basic standpoint, turn the other cheek. But think about all the positive things you can do for other people. And also understand our own fragility. You know, I have a little mantra that I developed, but I put it in the book, my Grace book, about focus on better. You know, Dorie, that we have at the end of the year or first of the year, we always have these New Year's resolutions. And so often, if you're like me, you forget them or break them, whatever. So I have this little concept called focus on better. So what does better mean? You define it: a better spouse, a better colleague, a better parent, a better person, and you just say the action steps that you'll do. So that's your call to action. And also, when I say better, it means it's within the human condition. So let's say I want to be a better listener. I want to be more attentive to my spouse. And there'll be times when I'm inattentive. All you have to do is ask her. So that I don't give up. I say, I'll do it better the next time. It's not a sweeping under the rug of our weaknesses, but it's more or less an overall pointing toward doing what is better, acting with kindness. You know, I call them intentional acts of kindness. How can you make things better for others? And one of the inspirations for me in the concept of grace is Father Greg Boyle, who was a Jesuit priest in East LA, who founded Homeboy Industries, which is the largest gang intervention program in the nation. And it's about providing jobs for ex-gang members. And he talks about connectedness, and he's a brilliant writer. And he has this concept called radical kinship. It's understanding people that you don't think you can really understand. And that's where grace comes in. And grace is little moments of turning the other cheek, not being upset, but it's also that great heroic actions that we do that change the world. So,
yeah, it's such an important reminder. But of course, John, we're coming out of, the past year, the past 15, 16 months of experiencing the pandemic. Many people are feeling burned out. They're feeling overburdened. And I hear certainly again and again from many folks that they feel like they are just operating on a little bit more of a hair trigger than they have been before. If there's somebody who is listening to this and they say, okay, I love it. I believe you, John. I want to lead with grace. I want to have more of this in my life, but I feel like I'm a little bit at my wit's end after the past year of the pandemic. Maybe I just don't have the tolerance built up that I want. People have been so stressed out. How do you reconcile those things? How can you insert just a little bit more of that, even when people are in rather difficult circumstances?
Well, that's a great question. And it would be our psychology friends would tell us, own it. Own that the fact I'm on a hair trigger. Own the fact that I'm burned out. Own the fact I don't have a lot of reserves. And so when you acknowledge it, you'll say, okay, I'm a human being. Take a pause, whatever a pause means, because it could be metaphorically looking out the window or physically looking out the window. Take a walk. Be kind to yourself. And also, as our friends Adrian Gostick and Chester Elton talk about in their book, Leading with Gratitude, it's acknowledge your own gratitude for self. And especially if you're in a challenge situation, consider all the good things you've done your accomplishments, but then just say, I'm a human being. I have survived. And this is where resilience comes in. You know, resilience is, I used to think it's just simply being knocked down and bouncing back, which it is. But so often the world that we're bouncing back to is transformed, certainly right now in 2021. So understand you're in a challenged circumstance. You can't do anything. You're not ready to go out and change the world, but say, take a pause, be kind to yourself, pamper yourself if you can, but also find a way where you might reach out and connect to someone else in some way. I mean, we could say volunteerism, but volunteer efforts, those kinds of things. Reach out to friends, just be there to listen. That's something that Father Boyle talks about. Of, well, you know, if we impose ourselves on someone, and I sit down next to you, Dorie, and say, okay, Dorie, I know exactly what you need to do. Boom, 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 boom. You'll probably be looking at me like, get out of my life, will you? But how about if I just sit down next to you and maybe we talk, maybe we don't. Maybe you start talking and you say, I'm wrestling with XYZ. And I say, hey, Dorie, would you like some, you know, my perspective on that? You know, I've experienced some things. So we have a conversation. So it's a form of connectedness. And I think grace is that enabler. It's that catalyst that we can do it. But I really like the way that you phrase this, because so many of us are feeling that way. We're stressed, we're burned out, okay? And maybe you need someone to sit down next to you, and that's okay. And seriously, if you're really feeling stretched, please reach out for professional assistance. There's lots of resources. There is no shame in this. In doing so, you're setting the bar for others to follow your lead, because you'll hope, ideally, you will get better and you'll talk about it and you'll recognize your own humanity. And each of us have our limits. Resilience, getting back to it, it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger you get. But in certain times, for unresilient, those muscles might be atrophied. So engage them. So excellent question.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. And a great question came in from Marion, who's joining us from Atlanta. Marion says, leading with grace can be a challenge when we don't show grace to ourselves, especially if we're caught up in the cycle of overachieving. And he wants to know, John, what are some ways that we can show grace to ourselves as leaders? Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Marion. And I think it's the same answer that I gave with Dorie about being overstretched. Achievement is good. Leaders are outward directed, but we're also human beings. And so you got to cut yourself some slack too. Just as I can tell from that kind of question, just as leaders who are well-intended are probably very understanding and very sympathetic to other people, and the people that they don't show sympathy to, maybe their own family members, but especially themselves. So cut yourself a break. When you're really feeling like that, it's time to take a pause, a vacation or a break from work, whatever it is. Find a way to regenerate yourself. And okay, if you can't take a vacation, then find a way to relax. Walk in the park, exercise is always good. Music is an outlet. Reading is an outlook. Conversation with friends. And now that we can go back out again, find some ways to socialize. But if you're too burned out to socialize, that's okay. You just need time. And that's something I think that this pandemic has taught us. Some of us are really outward and quick. We can pivot and change, and that's fine. All of us are not. Each of us is different. And so we need to celebrate that difference because all of us have something we can offer. So excellent question, Marion.
Yeah, John, thank you very much. This is Dorie Clark. We are here with Newsweek's weekly interview show, Better, with the author John Baldoni. Again, if you want to learn about John and his work, be sure to check out his website at johnbaldoni.com. And if you want to make sure you never miss one of our weekly Newsweek interview shows, you can follow me on LinkedIn at dorieclark.com/LinkedIn, and you will get notifications, which will be fantastic. So, John, a great comment came in from Eric, who just mentions, grace is a power tool for humanity, but more often than not, we get caught up in the challenges of the world and we tend to forget where we have come from. Eric, so true. Thank you for your comment and thank you for tuning in. Now, John, something that I am wondering about, in addition to your work as an executive coach, you actually have a pretty extensive background as a musician, and you have been incorporating music into the work that you do as well. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what that looks like?
I would love to. Do we have 3 hours? Actually, you're very kind to call me a musician. I took piano lessons as a child, and I will be truthful, I hated every minute of it. I dabbled a little bit in high school and then in college, and bought myself a piano when my wife Gail and I were first married, and that was well over 40 years ago. But I put it aside. And so I rediscovered it literally at the urging of a friend who himself went back to playing guitar at it. And so when I turned 60, I started playing piano. And then I said, you know, I'd like to start playing for other people. And so where do you go? Well, not exactly Carnegie Hall. I went to a retirement home. I played there. And then I started playing in hospital lobbies, because they promised me, Dorie, there would be talent agents there, but none of them came. But actually, a link into grace, when I played at the hospital, I saw moments of grace with staff and physicians and nurses, and reach out to to patients, but also their families. I saw grace in action in those little moments of touching people in a very positive way. Sometimes they were transformative. So, but I like to play because it would just kind of soften up. Nobody wants to be in the hospital unless you work there. And so I just play, and people liked the sound, and it put a smile on their face. And that gave me a lot of energy. So COVID struck, I can't play for audiences anymore. So I did a little bit of things on experiment on LinkedIn and that. And then when Grace Notes came out, I started thinking more about how can I integrate music as an experiment with this. So I have a little presentation I call the Reflective Recital on Grace Notes. And I play some themes and I ask questions with some musical backing, but it's mostly presentation, but I sit at a piano and I play. Sometimes it's improvisational, sometimes it's one of my favorite tunes. But music, as you well know from your experience as a lyricist, it's transformative. It's an emotional high, but it's an emotional experience. But it's embedded in us, and we remember music deeper than so many other things. It's in our inner being after a while, but it's just an augmentation, and particularly for Grace Notes, it complements it because I'm challenging people to reflect and to think, and music might help them do that. So.
Yeah, such a great point, John. Thank you very much. And Veronica agrees. She's tuning in here. She says, I find music is a great stress reliever. Absolutely. That is one of the keys for sure. And so we're here with John Baldoni, the author of Grace Notes. John, a question that I have, Grace Notes, of course, is your most recent book, but you have written 15 books, which is quite impressive. One of your more recent ones, and I think somewhere behind your head, there's a poster of it. In fact, is your book Moxie. And I wanted to be sure to ask you about that, because I guess if grace is perhaps thought of as being, sort of on the calmer, wiser, more loving end of the spectrum, Moxie seems to imply proactivity, get out there, go get them. Tell me more about what you mean by Moxie, why you wrote a book about it, why this is something that's useful and important for leaders.
Well, actually, I mean, it's a great thing when you Grace and Moxie. Now, wait a minute. Okay. But it is great. Moxie really is about guts and gumption toward a determined goal. It is also the sense of resilience. It is that perseverance, it's determination. And it is about your gumption. Sometimes we use the word grit. That's probably the more common word now. I just like the word moxie because it comes from the old movies of the 30s that I recall. It comes from the movies of the 30s and 40s when, usually they were talking about somebody with a prize fighter, on his last legs. And they say, the guy's got moxie, and we all need that. you know. And I also turned Moxie into an acronym, which mindfulness, opportunity, X factors are character, I is for innovation, and E is engagement. And so Grace and Moxie and Grace hand in hand with that connection of engagement, of reaching out and connecting with others. So.
Well, that is something that I think we can all appreciate and use more of. And thank you to everyone who's tuning in. If you have questions for John Baldoni, please feel free to type them into the chat box. We'd love to hear what's on your mind. And if you're enjoying this conversation, hit the like button, hit the share button so that your friends can benefit from this conversation as well. Now, John, you wrote an article a while back where you were talking about the fact that crisis, which of course we've just been through, certainly collectively over the past 15 months or so, but that crisis is actually a really good prompt for innovation. And I would love to hear more about your thoughts on that. How and in what ways have you seen people innovate during the pandemic? And what can we learn from all of that?
Well, crisis, I think, is a great way in twofold. One, let's talk the business aspect, which is people are reinventing work. You know, the work from anywhere phenomena was long established. It simply went on accelerated speed during the lockdown. So, you know, so we're rethinking, how do we go back to work and in what form and all of those things. So there, as far as, and people are challenging new services, new innovations. How do I connect with others? Well, also part of this innovation, I think, is we're rediscovering ourselves in new and different ways. We are realizing what we like to do. So we're gathering again in crowds, and I mean, for live events and those kinds of things, going out to dinner and meeting drinks and friends. So it's kind of a celebration of our humanity. I don't know that that's innovative, but it may seem that way because we are, you know, we're in a challenged circumstance. The people equation is what interests me the most. And I also like to say that crisis brings out the best in your people. It's a great talent spotting thing, because just as cream rises to the top in hot coffee, I think talent does. So you want to look for those people who, well, the proverbial think out of the box or don't even realize there is a box. So, but also people who are independently minded, but can also work in teams, are thinking of new ideas and not afraid to voice them. And so talent spotting is a good thing. And also, these are the kind of people who are genuinely resilient, and you're going to want them in your organization now when the good times are here and are coming, because those people will be, you know, the new foundation, the new sense of leadership. And also, as part of this reinvention of work, there's a colleague or a client of mine was talking about the other day of the Gen X coming into workforce. And some of them really, they haven't even been in an office yet or a workspace because they've been working virtually. So what are they going to teach us? We think about what we'll teach them, but what will they teach us? So perhaps the innovation paradigm, it's always, innovation bubbles up often from the bottom, you know, so that, how do we capture that?
Yeah, such a good question for us to be asking ourselves, especially in this time, which is so much of an inflection point where we're coming back to work, things are coming back to life. So, John, you have a regular LinkedIn Live interview show yourself. You mentioned that you frequently ask your guests about their own moments of grace. I would certainly be remiss if I didn't ask about yours. I'm sure that you have, you know, kind of standard ones that that you have talked about a lot. But I'm curious, if you were to look back in recent days, weeks, you know, months, if we have to go way back, but I'm curious if you could talk about a recent moment of grace that you experienced and what made it resonate for you as a moment of grace.
That's a great question. And I have to say, and it's something that you know about too, I'm a member of Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches, as you are. To me, joining the group as I did in October of 2019, that was an act of grace in the sense that it opened a new world to me. Best thing that ever happened to me in my late career, because I was able to connect with people like you, but also with the spirit of that Marshall Goldsmith teaches us is give back, share what you can. And so I have challenged myself to be sharing and to give, and I've received a lot in return. I've received, you know, people are, I've asked for favors, you know, as we all do as book authors, we say, could you please write an Amazon review, you know, please, 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 but that kind of thing. But no, people have shown me grace. If I have been maybe, and this is sort of intended to me, but I have a, I don't always act in a spirit of grace, and you just have to ask my wife, Gail, and I can lose my temper and usually in stupid situations. And I've had people just look the other way and say, you're better than that. And we know that. And so I'll go back and apologize or whatever it is. But they have shown me grace, and they have shown me a better path.
I think that's really lovely, John. Thank you. And yes, you have cited a powerful example. Of course, as you mentioned, we know each other from the Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches Association or organization that Marshall, who's considered one of the all-time great executive coaches, has put together. And in fact, I have a new book coming out in September called The Long Game, and I have a section in it talking about Marshall and the 100 Coaches Initiative as an example of what I call the reaping cycle, and how one gives back in your career to stay fresh and to make sure that you don't stagnate as you achieve your goals. So folks want to actually learn more about the new book, which is going to be available in September, but is available for pre-order now. They can check it out at dorieclark.com/longgame. So John, we have time for just about one more question. And one thing that I was curious about, you've obviously been spending your time really thinking deeply about the human condition. Your new book is Grace Notes. But in your most recent Forbes article, you talked about the mercy to act with kindness. You wrote about this, you know, you're a leadership writer. These are not often the topics or themes that get explored. What does it look like to have the mercy to act with kindness when you are in a leadership role? And how potentially can we all do a little bit more of that?
It's a great question. I'm trying to do these little themed articles on Forbes. I did one on wisdom. I did one on courage. Most recently is mercy, because I think there's far too less of it. Grace is the enabler of mercy. Why? Because grace enables us to act for the greater good. Mercy is that, in simple our parlance, give somebody a break. You know, don't take it personally. And on a small thing, a slight thing, turn the other cheek. But it's also acting with an open-heartedness. And part of that is, don't make it personal. And so depersonalize. And so what I mean by that is step back from it. You know what, Dorie? Not everything's about us, or at least not you. Not everything's about me. Mercy is that capacity to understand the human condition. It is empathy in action. It is kindness. And the way a leader shows it is by treating people with respect, being generous to them. And when transgressions are, mistakes are made, say, let's turn this into a learning experience. You know, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's mercy in action. So.
A powerful lesson for all of us. John Baldoni, thank you so much. John is here with us. He's the author of the new book, Grace Notes. And if you want to learn more about John, go to johnbaldoni.com. And if you want to make sure you never miss one of our weekly Newsweek interview programs, The Better Show runs at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, and 6 o'clock in Central Europe. You can sign up at dorieclark.com/LinkedIn, hit the subscribe button, and you will get regular reminders about the great guests who come on the show, like John Baldoni. John, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everyone who's tuning in, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Dorie.
Thank you. Take care.